SCP-8876 Anthropophobia Killing Floor. In 1906, the novel The Jungle was published, written by author Upton Sinclair. Sinclair had spent 7 weeks gathering information while working in meatpacking plants in Chicago in order to advance socialism in America, showing the struggles of the working class and immigrants amidst harsh and dangerous living and working conditions. Ultimately, however, the novel became far more notable for another reason, and that was its look into the state of the meatpacking industry, causing public outcry over health issues and unsanitary practices. This eventually led to a number of sanitation reforms, including the Federal Meat Inspection Act. It's interesting then that the public didn't really care about the treatment of the human workers in these places, or even the treatment of the animals being slaughtered, but rather the condition of the meat they were eating from these plants. SCP-8876 is an anomaly revolving around a slaughterhouse, and while the message here is somewhat predictable, the journey to get there is particularly grisly. Let's take a look. It's noted that this document details an ongoing investigation, and the information within may be subject to change. The containment procedures state that entry to Silverstone pork processing has been barred, and the physical and informational remnants of Hadley, North Carolina have been destroyed. SCP-8876 is the massacre of all 5,382 residents of Hadley, which occurred on the night of August 1st, within the confines of the nearby Silverstone pork processing plant. 8876-1 refers to the remnants of the event, an assemblage of human viscera that was found littering the property following the incident. While the majority of this is non-anomalous remains found within the premises, a number of pallets stacked with individual factory-sealed packages containing the detritus were also found inside the plant's packing and distribution area. This packing process is incompatible with the factory's existing capabilities, and impossible to perform without the use of heavily specialized equipment. The means by which the event occurred are presently unknown and subject to an ongoing investigation. From a thorough overview of the premises, a number of facts have been gleaned. Surveillance footage from between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. on August 1st is missing. The conditions of the remains indicate unknown and complex causes of death, beyond what any existing industrial machinery could inflict on the human body. And while viscera has been found within the plant's machinery, it could not have been used to slaughter large numbers of victims without anomalous influence. The victims, every resident of the town, included all of Silverstone's ownership and workforce, and livestock sourced from on-site storehouses were loosened from their pens and were roaming the premises at the time of the Foundation's arrival. While a premeditated element in the event has yet to be proven, the possibility of it has called for the attention of the Foundation's Department of Anomalous Crimes to jointly investigate. Following their initial survey and containment of the plant, efforts were underway to investigate the event. Current activities include evidence collection, scanning for anomalous residuals, and trauma analysis to ascertain the various causes of death. Over 800 carcasses have been identified, all mangled beyond recognition. Efforts to reveal any possible inciting incidents for the event have failed to produce any notable information, including investigations into the workplace logs and employee backgrounds. On August 6th, a request for the use of investigators with psychic capabilities, put in by the Unit Director James Barnes, was approved by Overwatch Command. Detective Allison Presley was shortly onboarded to the investigation, chosen for her prominent position on the Foundation's consultation committee and her experience with extrasensory animal communication. Trained students of this discipline are capable of retrocognitively viewing a simple organism's memories through touch. We're given a transcript of some surveillance footage automatically recorded from the analysis room on August 7th. Unit Director Barnes watches through an observation window inside of the plant's conference room, which has been turned into a makeshift office. He sips coffee through his rebreather, a device made necessary due to the air quality caused by the event. Detective Presley is inside the observation chamber, placing her hands atop a pig. She ceases and emerges from the chamber, clutching her head. Barnes asks her if there's a problem, but she just says, "compound," and collapses at the table before rifling through a briefcase. She fills a syringe with HA9, a chemical compound used by individuals with psychic capabilities to suppress the emotional and cognitive limitations that come from attempting to read sites of mass slaughter. She takes the syringe and injects it into her right eye before preparing to inject it into her left. Barnes tells her that he just needs a statement, but she cuts him off and tells him not to talk. She swears, and he says that he has to put something down, so she says, "Hell. Absolute hell." We're then given an excerpt of some viewing sessions performed by Presley and composed by Barnes. She places her hand on top of one pig, and after several minutes of sifting through more recent memories, she believes herself to have found one that is potentially relevant. She describes the subject leaving its pen alongside dozens of other pigs and venturing out into a sprawling industrial area. Her descriptions are muddled due to the limitations of animal recall, but she cannot connect it to a location within Silverstone Processing. She notes a sensory issue similar to that which prematurely ended her first viewing attempt, citing an overwhelming amount of noise surrounding the memory, and she interprets it as both industrial and human in nature. Due to the use of the suppressing compound, she does not cease viewing. Minutes later, she finds another relevant memory. The subject, traversing the sprawling factory landscape, is surrounded by rows of large enclosures, stacked atop one another. Undefined figures reach out from these enclosures, which the pig attempts to avoid. There is the sensation of a hand tightly gripping the subject before loosening its hold. The noise permeates, though this time, Presley interprets it with clarity as the sound of human voices, panicked and screaming. She notes a vivid image, as each enclosure is filled to its limit with humans, who she discerns have been stripped of their clothing and laid on top of one another to maximize space. Some are covered in their own waste and fluids, while others lay motionless at the bottom of their cages. The sounds of panic surround the memory, voices crying out in pain while writhing against one another. Their calls are rendered unintelligible from the subject's perspective. Presley then notes a small, fleeting visual of the subject staring into an empty enclosure. The cage slowly begins to fill itself with human-shaped figures, who manifest between the bars one by one. Further relevant communication with the subject was unable to be established. The memory of a second pig shows it watching a large piece of machinery with several other swine, and Presley notes that the vividness found within these sessions is not typical of ordinary animal recall. From the brief visual, she's able to interpret several characteristics of the scene. A cage is dumped from above into a machine topped with a large funnel, and an indiscernible amount of human figures fall into the machinery. Dozens of these machines form a production line, each funnel being filled with cages of victims. One victim attempts to pull themselves and another figure over the edge, briefly clinging to each other before being pulled back down into the mass of bodies. On another machine, two other humans are wrestling each other for a grip on the funnel's edge, until one latches a finger into the other's eyelids and begins to pull, tearing the skin. A series of short, subsequent memories were also collected, including the subject treading carefully over a floor lined with miscellaneous entrails, so much so that the tiling underneath cannot be discerned. Human victims are seen suddenly manifesting on a rack of hooks, each hung from their Achilles tendon as the rack moves deeper into the factory, and a breaking saw is seen lifting itself via an invisible force and severing the nose of a human figure. Presley makes note that these memories were surrounded by clear and prolonged feelings of fear and agitation from the pig, possibly towards the victims. She emphasizes the feeling's intensity as extremely uncommon compared to usual animal aggression. Memories from a third pig show it standing near a row of what appear to be large, metal, scalding tubs. Though they are slightly out of perspective, Presley uses sound cues to determine that unknown objects are rapidly falling into the tubs, resulting in a sensation of a splash of boiling water. Presley then senses the sudden feeling of being crushed by a slick, wet surface, which she realizes is likely human skin, burned and boiled beyond recognition. The sensation is described as a complete absence of body hair, with the flesh sloughing off into the subject's body as it tightens its grip. Suddenly, the body is lifted from the subject by indiscernible means and moved back in the direction of a scalding tub. The human, in response, continues to hold on to the subject in an attempt to anchor itself to the ground. The effort eventually fails, and the subject walks off. As the memory trails, Presley describes a brief flash depicting a mound of boiled, scalded victims stacked atop one another inside a drained metal tub. She believes they are still conscious, citing their intense, pained thrashing against one another. Minutes later, she recovers another memory, prompted by a feeling of hunger. The pig stands in front of a feeding trough, which suddenly becomes filled with unorthodox feed. Presley is unable to discern exact details, but can recognize the texture as soft, bloody byproducts. She ends the session prematurely due to being hit with a variety of strong gustatory sensation, and leaves the observation chamber to expunge herself. Later, after analyzing nearly 30 pigs, her and Barnes speak in his office. She says that looking at the scale here, being an entire town, and going off of those memories, she can't rule out whether this was consensual or not. It's happened before, with cult sacrifices and mass compulsion effects. Barnes counters that the victims were clearly moved to the factory and tortured against their will, and asks why they would fight back if they were willingly acting out some ritual. Presley suggests that it might just be instincts over ideals, but even if the town had no say in the matter, something did. If they trust these memories, the way the victims were manipulated through the machinery shows that there was a consistent force at play here. Barnes says that maybe they used the pigs to do it, but Presley says that they couldn't have, as she would have sensed that. These pigs had little agency beyond what a pig is ordinarily capable of, except for their emotions. That was the closest she's ever felt to hatred coming from an animal before, a distinctly human emotion, and it seemed to be directed at the victims. Visual recall is never this consistently clear across the board for every subject, but they were fixated on them. Barnes was also thinking about activists, someone making a statement about animal cruelty, but Presley says that none of the groups of interest primarily concerned with animal rights have displayed retaliation on this scale before. To carry out this murder requires extremely potent anomalous capabilities. The Foundation would have already documented someone with that kind of power, so if there is a suspect, they're not running around with anyone the Foundation knows. Something must have triggered genuine emotion in the pigs, as it's impossible for it to be present in every subject they view under ordinary circumstances. Barnes eventually says that this just might be one of those things that no amount of detective work can explain. Thousands died just because, and she's trying to explain away the anomalous. Presley replies that she likes to think her work isn't entirely pointless. and Barnes comments that they only have 1,798 pigs to go. Investigating the memories of a baby pig, Presley sees the subject, alongside several other suckling pigs, drinking their mother's milk. Activity in the peripheral is not recalled with enough clarity to discern a description outside of general noise. The suckling's feeding is interrupted by a feeling of aggression, and flashes fill the subject's mind. Human figures run freely throughout the factory, with Presley discerning that they are attempting to escape, freeing other victims from their holding cages. The suckling's mother squeals towards the group of survivors and charges towards them. Some humans are instantly moved elsewhere by the unseen force, and others scatter into the darkness. The subject, having lost interest, turns its attentions to a trough of what appears to be an assortment of thin, tough musculature, and continues feeding. In another adult male pig, Presley finds a relevant memory of the subject mating with a female pig next to a large piece of machinery. In the peripheral, a conveyor belt of restrained humans moves steadily along, outstretching the victim's limbs to their limits. The animal's copulation is interrupted by an overwhelming feeling of alertness. Both pigs cease their activities and begin running throughout the factory floor. Around them, dozens of other pigs scramble across the floor, underneath machinery and atop balconies. Presley locates another memory of the pig standing alongside several dozen other swine atop a balcony that encircles an enclosed depression. Pipes funnel a constant stream of blood, viscera, and byproducts into the pit. A group of humans who Presley interprets as escapees are seen below, wallowing in the excess. The subject briefly fixates on their struggle before turning to breed its mate. In an adult female pig, Presley finds a memory of the subject walking through a room and bumping into a plastic pallet. Dozens upon dozens of other pallets can be discerned, each stocked with unmarked aluminum cans. A can rolls towards the subject before hissing and bursting open, causing a large clump of tissue to slowly ooze out. The muscle expands and contracts, despite being cut from its body, and the subject begins consumption. Later, Presley sits in the office, studying Barnes' reports, and she asks him if he's noticed anything from the recent batch. Barnes notes that it was using the pigs as alarms, being able to put them on alert when they needed to rush a runaway. Presley agrees, but also remarks that these memories didn't take place in Silverstone pork processing. Aside from the obvious differences in surroundings and excessive machinery, the briefing data said that there were no residuals found within the factory or on the remains. This means that wherever they were, it wasn't the result of reality bending. Presley doesn't really want to speculate where it is, but the victims and animals were moved from Hadley to a second location, where the memories took place, and then to Silverstone processing. Their culprit is not capable of reality bending, and Silverstone processing is not capable of slaughter to this degree without reality bending being involved. Barnes asks why they would use this factory's animals then, and why bring everything back here. Presley says that there's two options, one being that these were the closest cluster of animals that the suspect could have used to act as extra eyes. The other is that Silverstone processing was all the suspect knew, evidenced by targeting Hadley in the first place and then returning the victims here. It makes even more sense if they read this as making a retaliatory statement. Barnes suggests that it might be an employee having an episode, sick of seeing the loss of life day in and day out. He knows that that type of distress can trigger anomalous activity. Presley replies that this would be a wildly calculated and prolonged move to make, even considering mental state. She doesn't think it's unreasonable to think that whatever caused this emerged from the plant in the first place. An egregore, or thought form, an entity born from a mass of feelings or ideas. Sometimes, if they're strong enough, they can establish a totem, a physical representation of themselves. Barnes notes that a factory farm is a good place for a nasty one to crop up, with constant death and suffering, a clear power dynamic. Presley says that they should continue, and she investigates the memories of another adult male swine. After a half hour of finding various sensations, feelings, and brief visual recalls, she discovers a relevant memory taking place sometime prior to the event. The subject moves inside of a crowded enclosure, cramped against other warm animal bodies. She's able to source the enclosure to the ones present at Silverstone Processing. The subject steps atop a smaller pig to get to a nearby trough of water, continuing to apply pressure until the sensation of the suckling writhing underneath gives out. As the subject drinks, Presley is presented with a prolonged flurry of visuals. There are scenes of intense slaughter, swine carcasses being chopped by machines in an assembly line, bodies strung from hooks, factory workers sitting at a table and unpacking pork products they brought home from work. The string of visuals continues, accompanied by feelings of increased aggression. They transition from the realities of the factory process to grotesque scenes similar to those observed in previous sessions. A collection tray of human intestines, carcasses that have been plucked entirely clean of internal organs from the neck down, a pile of naked, writhing humans wallowing in a pit of filth and viscera. Presley later places her hands on another pig, attempting to repeat the process, but she cries out and removes them almost immediately. She sits down in the office afterwards, visibly shaking, and Barnes hits the intercom to call for more of the compound for her, assuming that it wore off. She eventually says that it didn't wear off, she just needs a second. She says that she couldn't read it, as that's not a pig. Presley and Barnes then disappear. Footage of that event was taken from automatically recorded surveillance cameras located inside Silverstone Pork Processing. Analysis of corresponding footage from around the scene of the event later revealed the sudden disappearances of the entire research team, alongside the corralled swine, just seconds prior to the two disappearing. Attempts to discern their location have invariably failed, and the Foundation is presently discussing alternate means of monitoring Silverstone Pork Processing. Alright, so obviously this one has a whole heck of a lot of body horror to it, and the idea in itself of the roles in a slaughterhouse being reversed isn't entirely new, but the method by which it occurs is certainly a little disturbing. We're not left with much other than that some of the pigs at the slaughterhouse aren't actually pigs, and Presley's suspicion that this is being caused by some sort of thought form created through the pain and suffering of the processing plant. The curiosity of the situation is that the Foundation didn't find any evidence of reality bending at the site, and yet the culprit is obviously capable of something quite anomalous. Where the mysterious human slaughterhouse is actually located is unknown, and the Foundation doesn't have any sort of capability at the moment of finding it or stopping this from continuing. If there is some sort of hostile thought form built from the endless rage of pigs that is hell-bent on slaughtering humans, it sure doesn't seem like the Foundation is containing it. The real worrying thought, though, is if this happened at one slaughterhouse, what's stopping it from happening everywhere else?